Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Fundraising Academy's June workshop, How to Manage Major Gifts as a One-Person or Small Shop While Wearing Many Hats. I'm Angela Beard, and you'll hear a little bit more about me in a minute. For the Fundraising Academy, just a few words about us, exists to significantly help nonprofits significantly increase their fundraising capabilities and the impact they have in their communities and society. And we do that by providing low cost and free, yes, free fundraising training to working professionals and interested parties in the field. Glad to be here today. And a little more about me. I have 20 years of fundraising experience myself. Before I went into academia, I started teaching almost 10 years ago, which is hard to believe. After finishing my PhD in nonprofit management and financial management. So I've been at CU for 3 years now, directing the Fundraising Academy, and got to know several of you quite well, and I'm glad to see all of you here. Welcome. A few housekeeping notes. This is being recorded. We will send out the link after the webinar, after our wonderful tech people get it edited and ready to go, along with the PowerPoint. I am also moderating the chat while Kirk speaks, so questions, go ahead and type them in there. We've left time at the end for questions as well, but I know things come up as we're going, so feel free. I will be watching. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kirk to you. Kirk has been a fundraiser in the Seattle area since 1994 and is currently the Director of Advancement for the Academy for Precision Learning, which is an independent school serving students across the autism spectrum. He's led major gift fundraising, community relations, and government affairs for organizations such as the Seattle Children's Museum, the Lighthouse for the Blind, Youth Eastside Services, and Pacific Science Center. He's got degrees in English from University of Idaho and a master's in nonprofit leadership from Seattle University, where I also taught for a couple of years. And he's been on the boards and advisory members for several local and regional nonprofits, including 9 years of service on the board of AFP Advancements Northwest. He's been a presenter and panel member on several topics, including this one at a national AFP conference, which is where I saw his presentation and wanted immediately for him to come and speak for us. So without further ado, Kirk Laughlin.
Thank you, Angela, and thanks for those kind words of introduction, and thank you to all of you for joining this session on such a nice day. Apparently, we're just ahead of thunderstorms that might be coming. So I'm going to talk about ways we can integrate major gift work better into our day-to-day work, and compare that to some of the national research that's happened on this topic, and compare that to at least the reality in my own office and my own day-to-day work. So I wanted to start out by asking you what your shop is like. And if we're ready with that poll, I wanted to find out how many of you are a shop of one person. Is it you and one other person, or are there 3 or more people focused on fundraising? And I would fall into 2. I don't know if I'm actually supposed to answer this, if the poll will disappear if I do that. But oh, I'm getting a note here. It says host and panelists cannot vote. So yeah, if you take a second and answer that poll, that would be great. And yeah, I think this slide says what I've just said, to compare things to research and repurposing some of our current work into major gift stewardship opportunities. So it looks like it's split between 1, 2, and then a slightly smaller one other person has a 3 or more person size shop. So, okay, well, that's interesting. So that's good. That is the audience that this is intended for. So we can go to the next slide. So I would like to start out with this story. When I was first dating my now wife over 20 years ago, her grandmother asked me what I did for a living, and I told her, and she said, "Oh, you're like a panhandler who has gone pro." And I will say that that definitely stung a bit at the time. And the reason that comment stings has changed over the course of the intervening years sometimes. So I certainly feel like I am asking for money for the benefit of others when I am fundraising. But a lot of the times I feel like I'm not even really doing that, right? I am making copies. I am running to the storage unit. I am, responding to last minute requests. If I don't want to mess up my setup, but if I turn my camera around, my office is full of water bottles, hand sanitizer, a photo backdrop, bags of chips, because I'm helping get ready for our end of year celebrations here at APL. So it's a hard stretch to say any of that is really directly fundraising. And I mean, I went to Safeway and Fred Meyer and got all this stuff, right? So I'm definitely a small shop doing all that. And I would say the reason this comment stings now sometimes is I'm not even interacting directly with donors in the way that I should be if I in fact do have a tin cup out. So part of those things I listed off, I hope resonate with you, of the other things that are dominating your time. And we'll talk about how to turn some of those ongoing duties into ways to steward donors. So I think we can go to the next slide. So what don't you do? So these are all things that I rattled off mentally as I prepared for this. And updated this slide. So I'm definitely working on grants and sponsorships. I'm doing social media sometimes, definitely running events, writing annual fund appeals. So is there anything on here that you don't do? If you want to put that into the poll. And if there's something not on this list that I haven't thought of that might take up your day-to-day time, maybe you want to put it in the chat or in the Q&A, and Angela or Pujo can read it out. But it's just an example of how many other things are on our plates, and that don't necessarily lend themselves to establishing good and meaningful connections and relationships with our donors. So no one said, and I know I phrased this a little awkwardly, so it's all in the negative, but no one said events. So it sounds like everyone's doing events. Maybe the thing that people are doing the least is social media, but that's only a little bit in the lead. So and if there's something way out of bounds of this list that you do that I'm not thinking of, I would love to hear it. But there's some other things I think I put on the slide, like volunteer management. I'm definitely the contact for most of our parents, I also manage just by default manage the storage unit because I have a lot of storage for fundraising there. So that has just morphed into me becoming the person people go to with questions about what's in storage. So the recommendation from some of the research I will reference in just a moment is that it would be ideal if we were all spending at least the equivalent of one workday or more on major gifts, and I struggle to get to that level, and certainly don't reach hitting even 25 or 30% of my work week focus just on major donors. But I think it probably won't be a huge surprise that the research says that's exactly what we should be doing, because that's where most funding comes from. And if we can go to the next slide. Before I get into that research, I want to give credit where it's due. 3 or 4 years ago, back when we had in-person AFP international conferences, I was lucky enough to attend a seminar on this subject. And with the permission of the 3 people named here, I have permission to reference this information and put in a plug for their great report. So if you go to Mastering Major Gifts, you can access this report in full. But these are all Amy, Jay, and Adrian, Dr. Sargent are all very smart, much smarter than me. And a theme of this presentation will be stealing, even if it's from yourself, stealing items to use to engage with donors. So in that light, I've stolen a little bit of the information from this report to share with you. If you want to go to the next slide. So this group had, for this presentation I saw, had surveyed nearly 700 nonprofits nationwide, and all 700, or nearly 700, had operating budgets of $10 million or less. And the vast majority were organizations with $4 million or less annual operating budgets. And so their surveys and research of those organizations matched what is also, very present in a lot of other national research, that most of the money that is donated comes from individuals. And I realized just this week and next week, a new report from Giving USA will be coming out. So this will be slightly outdated, maybe even as of this moment. But the general gist of it will continue, that most money is donated by individuals, either directly, as indicated here, plus bequests, which are obviously gifts also from individuals, and then some percentage of foundation funding can fairly be counted as individual gifts, as well as some donations are essentially instigated by an individual, but it comes through a family foundation. So we're going, the exact percentage will change year to year, but it will be in the mid 80% at least of annual funding is given by individuals. So that's where we should be spending our time. But the reality is we're doing all those other things that I had you look at in that poll, and that I myself am doing. And excuse me. And then we can also go to the next slide. A lot of those other ways that we're raising money, in particular events, are much more expensive per dollar raised than fundraising by approaching major donors. So that was also borne out by this Mastering Major Gifts report, but it's also something that is a frequent topic of research and seminars like this, that events can cost as high as 50 cents per dollar, grants at 20 cents per dollar, and then an efficiently run major gifts program, that amount can be as low as 10 cents per dollar. I looked at my own information. Obviously, these larger studies are drawn from lots of information, so your shop may not exactly match these figures, and that it still can all be true. There can be a national average, obviously, with it being different in our own shops. My large fundraiser, which takes up a lot of time and effort, is an annual auction at APL, and its costs is more at the 25 cents per or 30 cents per dollar raised, because a lot of our major gifts come in that way. So in that regard, it's a little hard for me to think about totally separating special events from major gifts. But because of that combination, my dollar amount for my major fundraiser is much lower than 50 cents. But it's also possible to have a first time event maybe not even break even, right? Or cost a lot more than cost maybe 90 cents per dollar or 75 cents per dollar. So I think in the average, this seems accurate, even though your mileage may vary based on the individual event. And even an event like Give Big, which maybe we all recently participated in, is an event and takes some time, but the cost to participate in that is relatively low, and I would say well below 50 cents, and well below even a mailing campaign. So these averages are useful to compare to, but also be conscious of your own audience and shop. We can go to the next slide. So another issue raised in this report is that our donor pipelines tend to be too big. We're trying to deal with too many donors by ourselves, or too many prospects. And there is advice before you might raise this question. There is advice on a suggested number of donors and prospects to work with. But that at a certain point, you reach a tipping point where your inability to effectively build connections with donors has an inverse effect on the amount of money that you're raising each year. It lowers your donor retention, because you're not keeping in good enough contact with those donors. You're not engaging with them in a meaningful way. And I think a correlating factor is the result of relatively high turnover in our profession. And this isn't precisely part of this report that I'm referencing, but there has been an ongoing concern about the turnover rate amongst fundraisers. And in the report from 2000, I want to say 13 or 14, the underdeveloped report, which I have not put the link to in these slides, but I can find that and include it. That found that the average tenure of a fundraising professional was 18 months, which is short. And I think all the duties that we've listed that we're involved in, and dealing with too big of a donor pipeline, contributes to that feeling, maybe a burnout that may inspire us to change jobs before it's best for the organization, right? If your lead fundraiser is changing every 18 months, then that lead person who should be keeping in contact with donors and developing meaningful connections with major donors over time is limited. Your organization's ability to have those relationships is limited. So I'm making that connections. That's just based on my own correlation between high turnover rate and the duties of a fundraiser who's also trying to do major gifts in the midst of everything else. We can go to the next slide. So this is the average recommendation of this panel. I will say that even amongst those three speakers at the presentation I attended, they did not precisely agree on the prime number of donors and prospects. So this is an average of what they suggested, which makes sense given the nature of different shops and how they interact with donors. So their suggestion was that a single fundraising professional who is not full-time working with major donors, that they're it's a mixed group of duties, just like we're discussing, that the ideal number of active current major donors is 20 to 30, that the right number of active prospects is 16 to 20, and they defined active prospects as donors that just lapsed within the last 12 months, donors with great capacity that have been introduced by a close connection of the organization, such as a board member, or is connected in some other way to the mission very closely. And then only 5 to 10 colder prospects. And every time I give this presentation, which I've given it a few times over the years and update it, I always look at my own donor portfolio to see how I compare. And my number of major donors, I'm pretty good. I might be a little higher at present than the 20 to 30, but it's not not too bad. And my active prospects are relatively reasonable, but I tend to pack up those cold prospects, looking at long lapsed donors or possible guests of our auction that our board members or other donors are bringing to our event. Because in a way, it's comforting, even though I was just talking about how bad it is to have that large pipeline, right? It's comforting in a way to have that big list in Excel to say like, well, if I can just get 10% of all these colder prospects, that'll really help in this major gifts line. But having too many people to try to build a meaningful connection to, as I just said, the research shows that it's counterproductive, and that you should be spending more of that time on your active prospects and certainly your current donors. We go to the next slide. There we go. All right. So this gets back to what I mentioned at the beginning of trying to find at least that one day a week. And one way to build that one day a week to focus on major giving is to mark out 90 minutes per workday. So you take 90 minutes, multiply by 5, they're pretty close to a full workday. And even if that seems like too big a spot on your calendar, maybe you break it up into 3 30-minute periods per day, and break it out into these task groups that I've listed here. So to me, that's very helpful to have it physically blocked out on my physical calendar or Outlook. I think it's dangerous to have it in your mind. And I'm saying it's dangerous because I have fallen into it, that you have it in your mind that you're going to do major gifts on a certain day, or that you need to get to it. But it's so easy for these other tasks that we've mentioned, events in particular, but everything, social media, working with volunteers. There's a certain time urgency to those that sometimes major gifts doesn't seem like it has. There's not necessarily a deadline. Well, I have our high school graduation this Friday, right? That's going to happen Friday, whether I am prepared, whether I have everything together or not. So it's easy to get pulled into those very time sensitive projects and push things that related to major gifts aside, because maybe there's not a firm deadline of reaching out and connecting with someone. So I find it helpful to even put these specific things in my calendar for 15 minutes here and there to add up to that 90 minutes. So breaking up that 90 minutes into making 5 thank you phone calls, or prepping your executive director to write thank you notes. Especially blocking, this is more me talking about myself, blocking out the time to update information in your CRM and Donor Perfect or Razor's Edge or whatever platform you use, because I am terrible about letting emails and conversation notes pile up and then having to make it a big chore to get them all entered. So there are certainly, administrative things like that are good to do, but also you can be encouraging board members to, either reach out or remind them about the list that maybe you sent them last week, to make personal contact with donors. And then, of course, don't neglect to block out in that calendar to directly call or email donors to ask them to meet with you on Zoom, to have coffee or lunch, just to update them about what's been going on with the organization, what's coming up, how have you been dealing with the pandemic, what is the organization looking towards. It's really having those authentic conversations rather than really trying to guide them towards a proposal of some kind. You certainly want to get to that point, but in the meantime, you just want to keep them authentically updated about what's going on in your organization. And I'm going to give you some more examples about that, about how to do that in a moment. So, I meant to say this early on. I assume that if there's some burning question or something that needs to be addressed immediately, that Angela will let me know if someone has such a great insight that they can. All right. there really is a disadvantage doing this on Zoom. I can't see people nodding. I assume you're all laughing and you're so charmed by my self-deprecating nature. So, all right, let's go on to the next slide. So, one of the ways that we talked about making your work life better is how to make that pipeline smaller. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. Although you could apply these criteria to also make your pipeline bigger if you don't think you have enough meaningful or active prospects to consider major donors. So I was thinking of this more of a way to make your list more manageable. But I believe these are all common ways to prioritize which donors to be reaching out to. So giving level and the length of giving, I think, are very self-explanatory. Also looking at how long it's been since you last contacted them. But some other things that might play into it are they mission related? So that might mean are they a client, or are they a family member of a client or student? Are they connected to your mission in some way? Like maybe they were served by or connected to an organization that serves the same population, or is a partner agency. The example I thought of where APL is situated in the U District, we are connected to the U District Rotary, and we're a member of the business community of the U District. So there are some partners we have through organizations like that. When I was at Seattle Children's Museum, we were partners with other agencies on campus. So that might be a way to, if you're trying to make your list a little smaller, maybe you tighten up what you consider a major donor, right? If your current basic level of major donor is $1,000, and it's making your list too hard to manage, maybe you move that bottom level up to 2,500, which doesn't mean you do away with being in good contact with those mid-level donors, but this is just how to prioritize who you're giving the highest amount of attention to during those 90 minutes per day, or 1 hour, or one workday per week. And again, if it's been a long time since you've contacted them, maybe you need to prioritize some of those people that you have not had any personal contact with in a month, or or the last quarter. So these are just ways to think about way to prioritize your list so it doesn't seem overwhelming and daunting. And also obviously use these criteria if you need to expand your list to consider who you should be treating as a major donor, even if right now you weren't thinking of them that way. We can go to the next slide. And I think this, what's keeping you from doing this? I think I've covered this already. This is all the other things that we're working on, and unexpected projects. And I think I mentioned projects with imminent metrics, and that's my fancy way, I guess, of saying things with deadlines, or if it's an event, there are a lot of metrics around an event, around attendance and number of volunteers involved, and tickets sold. And again, those kind of measurements can suck up your time trying to meet when the timeline for working with a major donor might be a little more open-ended, and it's easy to get pulled away. And if you have other ways that your time is pulled away from this, I look forward either to talking about it when we have a Q&A at the end, or if you want to put items in the comments. So we can go to the next slide. So in a small shop, you're producing a lot of material, maybe almost by yourself, and a lot of those duties that are pulling away from your time that you could be spending with major donors are producing things that you should be stealing, right? Back to that thing, stealing from yourself, stealing from your own department, to use steward your connections with major donors. So this is related a lot to events, but it doesn't have to be limited to it. Just that events are always on my mind. So what are you sending out already? If you're doing some type of event, you're probably sending an invitation or at least some type of reminder postcard. If you have that big stack of envelopes that are going to be bulk mailed or nonprofit rate mailed, pull one out, put a first class stamp on it, and add a note to an individual donor. And maybe that donor said, or maybe that note, depending on the donor, says, we can't wait to see you at this event. Or if they don't typically like to come to events, you can write a note such as, we thought you'd like to see this because there's a lot of cute pictures of our students in this invitation, right? Anything to make it personal. And that goes for a lot of things that are part of the event and just part of a regular business. So if you have giveaways that are left over after a special event, every water bottle, every tchotchke that was going to go at a table like that, those items can also be sent to donors. Or if there's a meaningful photograph that came from an event. For our last auction during pandemic, we held it online, and so we did a lot more fancy packaging for things than we would typically do for some of our items, because we had guests ordering pre-event gift bags or gift boxes. So I had to order these very, very nice looking stickers, like labels for these boxes, but I had to order a minimum number in a roll. I couldn't just order 100. I had to order a roll of 250 or something like that. So I had all these very nice looking kind of metallic printed stickers left. So I used those. I had a volunteer cut them down to take off the actual date of the event and use them to decorate some mailings and gifts for donors that we sent items to after our auction. Again, these were donors who couldn't attend, or they didn't typically attend the auction, but we were able to give them a bit of a flavor of the event. So, but even better than events, even though that takes up a lot of my thought process is events, what other mission related content do you already have around? And that might be, content from all staff emails that go about thanking a staff member for going the extra mile, or an internal message about how a particular client or child is doing well. Of course, adhering to all privacy laws, et cetera. But is there anything that's coming directly from a staff member that could be put aside in a pile, either a physical pile or an email folder to be sent out to a donor to show an authentic moment of the mission? Are you having an all-staff meeting that updates on your accomplishments and challenges of the year, or a brainstorming session about what work is going to look like when you get back into the building after this pandemic year? Those are opportunities to invite your donors to attend, if that works with your organization, and if not, to at least capture notes from, to share with them. Even invitations to events like that, some kind of quarterly annual meeting at my school, where I work now. We have back to school night for parents, and that's a nice opportunity to invite our donors to come to, so they can meet parents. They can see the mission in action to an extent. And I won't say very many donors take me up on it, but also the outreach, the connection of making the invitation is also meaningful to the donor. So getting them there is also great, but it also provides a nice excuse for you to reach out, and provides you an opportunity to share some content with them, even if it's just through the outreach to invite them. other things you might have is for those meetings and maybe from special fundraising events. I always end up with a lot of speaking points that I wrote up for the executive director to say, or my board chair. And I'd like to say they always stuck to them 100%. That's usually not the case, but I do have these nice, basically letters, these nice scripts written, and those are things to turn into notes to the community. Also, content for your website and shortened up into blog posts or social media posts. But those are all things that also can be sent out to your donors. The one quote that was not from someone on the speaking panel, but a friend of mine who's a fundraiser in Texas emphasized that the more authentic and unpolished representation of your mission is going to be the most meaningful to your donors. So getting to see some of the rougher, statements from staff, I'm saying rough in quotes, but not polished up by a fundraiser, not necessarily graphic designed, but anything that seems real is very meaningful. So as much as you can to share that with your donor. It doesn't mean you're doing a lot more work in terms of producing something, but it does take the work and the time to gather it and share it in a thoughtful way. We go to the next slide. And then here, just because after trying to sound smart, I also like to share some things where I felt like I wasn't so smart as warnings. So there definitely are things that can go wrong with this kind of, especially if you're in a small shop, you're not drawing on some major gifts officer who is immersed in this thought process all the time. So I think there's some strength in the small shop, which I'll get to at the end, but there's also the danger you're jumping from one thing to another. So if you haven't had much personal contact with your donors on a consistent basis, if they suddenly get a phone call from you or your executive director or a board member, that can be startling. And their first reaction might be, don't call me, don't fundraise from me on the phone. And I know when I make a thank you call, I kind of almost rush at the beginning to say, this is Kirk from APL. I'm calling to say thank you for your gift at blah, 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 or I'm calling to ask your advice on our new project or to tell you about something exciting. So just you and your volunteers should be prepared for that. There might be a moment of surprise from your donor, even though textbook says you need to make personal contact, but donors need to get educated to that and may be a bit put off by that at first. And then just more in general, not prepping your volunteer enough, or that can also extend to not having prepped your own information enough in your own database, where you call someone who has been a great donor, but in the past year, there's been some, significant change in their employment or family situation where, they can't be a donor at this time, or some other change. So it's one thing for a staff person to kind of roll with that information, but also making sure your volunteers are prepared to receive information that might not always be completely positive. Like in some ways, you're also gathering information about someone. And if you haven't completely updated your file or haven't been in close contact, that can be a surprise, especially for a volunteer. You might get negative feedback. That's what I mean by you need to be ready for every kind of personal feedback. It'd be great that most of the time people are very grateful to get a simple thank you message, but you might end up fielding some complaints about your organization, or they want you to update the mailing list, right? Even if it's a volunteer, right? They might get that kind of thing. So it's just being prepared for the fact that this is a human interaction and more personal than maybe the type of contact you have when you're managing an event. And I would ask, maybe, I know I'm running a little long perhaps, so I'm going to say when we get to the Q&A, maybe if some of you have some examples of good or bad interactions with donors, I would love to hear them. So we can go to the next slide. So this is just a sample calendar to work with your board or other group of volunteers. I guess I shorthanded it by assuming board members. But if you make major gift work an ongoing part of the board's work, and if they're meeting each month or on a bi-monthly basis, right, having some element of major gift outreach and as even a short presentation during each board meeting, it helps keep it present in your board members' mind rather than solely reporting on how sponsorship is going or how attendance is going for an event or on grants submitted. You definitely, I know, need to report on that kind of information as well. But making sure that this kind of personal connection and outreach is also reported on as often, even if it's the concept of personal outreach or talking about the long-term benefits of bequests and planned giving. So we go to the next slide. And then you're also going to have exceptions to the rules. And I reference this a bit at the beginning too, but there's certainly going to be situations where the national research does not match or nationally accepted best practices are not going to work for your organization. And the example that I like to use is, even though I just talked about how important individual giving is versus corporate giving and other types, in a lot of places I've worked, there are some corporate sponsorships that are entwined with an individual. And so in working with the company, you really are working with the individual that is connected to your organization or to employees. And I put special event, I can't quit you. My own organization at present, our large auction is the main way that we garner major gifts. A lot of our major gift donors kind of grew up, so to speak, as that event got bigger and bigger over the years. So that's how they like to give. And you might be able to say, if you're just looking at the mathematics, that special event is overly expensive and too much of a time drain. But if that's how your donors like to give, then that's how they like to give. And you need to find a way to maximize it as a stewardship tool if that's what's working for your donors. And I'm sure there are other examples and things I've said that you will find conflict with your own experience with your donors, and you should embrace that and make it work as best as it can for you. We can go to the next slide. And this is close to my final slide. If I had thought of earlier of using Yoda as a metaphor for small shops, Yoda would have been all over these slides, but I did not think about this till almost the end. So, I think there's a great strength in the size of our shops and the fact that I maybe have highlighted some drawbacks. Those are true, but also I find it to be energizing in a way that this volunteer who is going to help me move these water bottles out into the parking lot is also connected to a family who has had a student at my school for years and years and is a family member of a major donor, right? So in some ways, that person is a great active prospective donor who I maybe shouldn't be wasting their time by moving my water bottles, but that's what she wants to do, right? And there's a great strength and synergy to that connection. And I'm sure you all have examples of that in your own shops. So, we may not be able to devote the time to a portfolio of major donors in the way that someone at the University of Washington might be able to, but our organizations, maybe by their very nature, are more grassroots, at least at this moment in their evolution. And so I think we should embrace all that we can of the elements of our small shops being entwined with our major gift efforts. And that helps us understand our donors. better. At least it can, if you're not totally consumed by the day-to-day details of those other elements. So, I mean, go to the next slide. I think this last one is just me saying, oh no, right. So just in case you didn't get it from the first slide, again, the name of the report is Mastering Major Gifts. And I encourage you to check out the great work of these three individuals who are probably familiar names to you. They present a lot, and they have books you should buy. And so I feel like I should plug them as much as possible, and for thanking them for letting me draw on some of their information. And then I think the next slide is my closing slide. There we go. I knew this had to end at some point. So again, thank you so much for your time today. There's some contact information for me, and I will plug my own school one more time. Academy for Precision Learning is an interesting and unique independent school that serves kids across the autism spectrum in an inclusive setting, meaning that we have a certain percentage of our students who are typically developing. And we're a unique model, and I encourage you to check us out. So I did. Okay, I left some time for questions. We're okay, right?
We are okay. So I am ready to take your questions, or Kirk is ready to take your questions. I'm just ready to translate. I actually have a question while everybody is drumming up the courage to ask theirs, and it's a technical one, but bear with me for all the financial management experience that I was denigrating when we were chatting. I'm curious as to how your special events gifts are usually restricted to the event, right? Or do you put a general case out as what you're fundraising for and are able to use those major gifts for operating, or how does that work?
Are you asking the whole group, or are you asking me in particular? Well,
I'm asking you, but if anybody else has experience, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So I'll answer first, and then I encourage everyone to jump in. So for our special events, we usually pick some element of programming to focus fundraising for the event on, and usually we pick something that is so embedded as part of the organization that that donations towards it would not necessarily be counted as a restricted. So we might do something like towards what's a good example, towards the future of the school, right? Help us do these projects in moving forward. But in those cases where we do highlight something very specific or time limited, then yes, then there have been situations where we've had to carve out some, say, raise the paddle or major gifts through the event towards this particular project, whereas sponsorship and ticket sales maybe were counted towards the annual fund, towards annual operations.
Gotcha. Great. We have a question from Karen. Any advice for a small shop hiring their first director of development to help build a major gifts program?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, obviously, if it's possible to hire someone who has built a major gifts program where there was not one in the past, that would be ideal. But I'm going to assume maybe you thought of that already. I would say, try to look for someone who has worked in major gifts in the past, or at least had roles where they worked in a very one-on-one setting with donors. So maybe that's, someone who has had some major gifts work, but also worked very closely with the board or with a volunteer, a committee. I mean, I will say the mechanics of setting up a major gift program, they can be somewhat extensive, but it's not rocket science. It's sort of like setting up sponsorship levels for an event. If you're setting up a formal society of major donors, but it's having the comfort level of interacting one-on-one, which may not be apparent from someone's from someone's background. I mean, that you may have worked major gifts a lot, but maybe not directly one-on-one. And so I would say that might be the most important quality, that they're comfortable engaging with donors in a personal way. But I would welcome any other comments on that as well.
Karen says, excellent.
Oh, it's Karen Mudd. Oh, Karen, I know you.
Karen says, excellent, and thanks. And I agree. Thank you. That was really helpful. Other questions? Don't be shy, people.
Did everyone eat lunch right before this started? So now,
or you're eating lunch now, and
right.
So there's one question in the Q&A box.
Oh, thank you. How do you feel about holding special events just for your major donors so they can meet each other and offer input to your leadership?
Yes, I like that type of event. I would say I would try to keep it less elaborate than an auction. Now that I do an auction every year, that is my baseline for overly cumbersome event. But yes, I think holding a dinner or some kind of meeting, if you have the space at your organization, I think that can be very meaningful. Obviously, a great way to engage people is to ask for their advice. This kind of goes along with my warning about people shying away from receiving the thank you call, is that if you reach out to your major donors to come to an event, their immediate reaction may be that it's a fundraiser. So I think putting out a subject, or putting out the main idea that there is a subject to be talked about. So whether you're going to present on a future idea that you want their input on, or you want them to meet an important program person, I definitely have found that donors like meeting program leads who are actually doing the work of the mission more than me, or they've seen me a lot. Maybe that's it. They've already seen me a lot.
Yeah.
But I think having some topic to discuss is great, and makes it an easy, it makes it an easier draw when you're asking for that type of advice.
So we have a question from Shannon for you, Kirk, but also the entire group here. Okay. Curious if folks who typically would have summer or fall events are doing in-person events this year.
Oh, that's a great question. I would like to hear that too.
Anybody who has something helpful to share is welcome to type it into the chat or unmute yourself. In my travels, I've seen a lot of hybrid events happening. Either they're less in person and online at the same time, with less guests expected in person, and a shorter event, not the 3 or 4 hour gala, but an hour to an hour and a half. But that's, very anecdotal. All the webinars that come through my inbox for event planning, I've been ignoring because it's overwhelming. What are some of you all seeing out there? Anyone?
So I'll just jump in, and then while other people are that we have our annual fundraising event actually next March, and this past late February, when we had our event this calendar year, of course, it was all online. We are already planning for our event next March to be somewhat hybrid, because we're going to take away the lesson from our hybrid event that we had a lot of participation from throughout the country, from people who would not typically be able to attend our auction. So we're going to, and in that way, shorten some of the mechanics of the event. And that will give us, if people are still not all that excited about packing into a ballroom next March, that will still allow us some access to donors, outside the room. So, but I don't know what we're going to do this fall.
Karen, I saw your box light up. Did you have something?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm working with an organization that is regional, and they were getting ready to do their first event when the pandemic hit. And so it at the last minute became virtual. And now they've done two. They have been groundbreakingly successful. And I am strongly urging them to keep them virtual so that they can grasp all the people at one time in their whole region, and that the cost is so much lower. And they're going to develop parties where each, like table captains are invited to get a group together at their house when these are going to happen, so that there are these intimate gatherings happening that reinforce the event. But the event is so powerful and well produced that it's super inspirational to be able to air to the whole region. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a trend, to keep virtual events.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I just went to an event for a multi-service center a couple of weeks ago that was just that, Karen. It was a crab feed, but no one was there in person. But they panned, what's the correct word? They checked in with several board members, table captain type folks who had gathered people in their homes. Some of them had costumes, and it's a crab feed. So people were wearing their little claws and their seafaring outfits, and they were having a lot of fun, and the event went over goals. So I hear what you're saying.
Yep. And you don't have to worry about the weather.
Or parking.
Or parking.
Okay. Any more questions? We've got a couple minutes. All right. Well, how can I thank you, Kirk? This has been just wonderful and fascinating, and I could keep you for a while.
Thank
but
you.
I know you've got graduation coming. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. A huge thank you to our guest speaker. I will be sending out the video link and the PowerPoint for this very shortly. And I hope everyone enjoys the warm weather and their summer, and we'll see you all again soon for our July workshop, hopefully.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.